30 minutes. That's all the time it took. 30 minutes between the moment Chinese naval vessels moved to challenge American warships in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on the face of this earth, and the moment the United States Navy responded in a way that sent a message not just to Beijing, but to every nation watching from the sidelines. And people were watching. Because what happened in those 30 minutes wasn't just a naval incident. It was a preview. A glimpse of what the next great power confrontation at sea actually looks like when it stops being theoretical and starts being real. Warships, signals, decisions made in seconds that could have consequences lasting decades. Today, we are going to break down exactly what happened, why China made this move, how America responded, and what it tells us about where this rivalry is headed. Because if you think this was just a routine naval encounter, you are not seeing the full picture. And before we get into it, we want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching this from. Whether you're in the United States, the UK, Australia, India, Pakistan, the Middle East, or anywhere else on this planet, let us know your country. Our audience spans the entire globe, and every single video, we are amazed by just how many places are tuned in. So go ahead, drop your location in the comments right now. We read every single one. Now, to understand why what happened in the Strait of Hormuz matters as much as it does, you first need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is and why every major military power on Earth treats it as one of the most important pieces of geography in existence. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water sitting between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide. 21 miles. You could drive that in less than 25 minutes on a highway. And yet, through those 21 miles flows approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply every single day. Roughly 17 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz daily. Saudi Arabian oil, Iraqi oil, Kuwaiti oil, Emirati oil, Qatari liquefied natural gas. All of it moves through this narrow choke point on its way to Asia, to Europe, to the United States. If the Strait of Hormuz closes even for a week, the global economy convulses. Oil prices explode. Supply chains break. Markets crash. It is not an exaggeration to say that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most economically critical geographic features on the entire planet. And that is exactly why the United States Navy has maintained a continuous, dominant presence in and around it for decades. And it is exactly why China choosing to challenge that presence there in that specific location is not a random or accidental decision. It is a statement. Let's talk about what China has been doing in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf over the past several years. Because context is everything here. For most of the post-Cold War era, China largely stayed out of the Gulf militarily. It was economically engaged deeply so, buying enormous quantities of Gulf oil and investing heavily in infrastructure across the region, but it kept a low military profile. The Gulf was America's strategic backyard, and China, for a long time, was content to let it stay that way, while it focused on building its military capabilities closer to home, in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. But that posture has been changing, gradually at first, then more noticeably, and now in ways that American military planners can no longer categorize as subtle. China has been expanding its naval presence in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. It established its first overseas military base in Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa, in 2017, directly positioned to project naval power toward the Gulf. Chinese naval task forces, typically centered around a destroyer, a frigate, and a supply ship, have been conducting what China calls anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Aden and surrounding waters for years. But the nature and the confidence of those patrols has been changing. The ships are newer, the capabilities are more advanced, and the willingness to operate in proximity to American naval assets, to not back down, to not give way, has grown considerably. And then there is the strategic partnership between China and Iran. In 2021, China and Iran signed a 5-year comprehensive cooperation agreement, a deal covering economic investment, infrastructure development, and significantly, security and military cooperation. China has been providing Iran with technology, with investment, and with diplomatic cover at the United Nations. In return, Iran provides China with oil at discounted prices, and crucially, with a geographic and strategic position that puts China's interests inside the Persian Gulf itself. When Chinese naval vessels operate in waters near Iran, they are not just passing through. They are operating within a strategic framework that Beijing and Tehran have deliberately constructed. And the United States military is acutely aware of this. Now let's get to what actually happened, the specific encounter that is the heart of this story. Chinese naval vessels, operating in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz, moved into a position that American naval commanders interpreted as a direct challenge to U.S. freedom of navigation in those waters. The details of exactly what transpired in the opening minutes of this encounter are the kind of thing that unfolds on encrypted radio channels and radar screens that the public never sees directly. But the shape of what happened is clear from what followed, and from the patterns of similar encounters that have been documented by the U.S. Navy and reported by defense analysts who track these situations closely. Chinese warships moved to shadow, and in some accounts, to physically intercept the path of American vessels operating in or near the strait. This is a tactic with a name in naval doctrine. It's called shouldering, or crossing the bow. It is a deliberate, calculated act of nautical intimidation. It says, "This is our space too. We are here. Move or we will make things complicated." What it is not is an act of war. And that's what makes it so strategically sophisticated and so genuinely dangerous. Because it sits in this razor-thin space between provocation and conflict designed to challenge and to pressure without technically crossing the line into open hostility. China has perfected this kind of gray zone maritime pressure in the South China Sea, using it against Vietnamese fishing boats, Philippine Coast Guard vessels, and even American naval ships over the course of years. What is new and significant is that this approach, this gray zone naval pressure, is now showing up in the Persian Gulf. In waters that China has no historical military claim to, in one of the most strategically sensitive waterways in the world, that is a deliberate escalation of China's geographic ambition. Now, 30 minutes later, how did America respond? And this is the part that really matters, because the response tells you everything about how the United States military intends to handle Chinese naval assertiveness in the Gulf going forward. The American response was immediate, coordinated, and carefully calibrated to send exactly the right message without triggering an escalation neither side actually wants. U.S. Navy vessels held their course. They did not yield. They did not back down. They did not alter their route in response to the Chinese maneuvering. In naval terms, this is significant because yielding, even once, establishes a precedent. It tells the other side that the tactic works. And if a tactic works, it gets used again, and then again, each time a little more aggressively. The U.S. Navy's refusal to yield was a foundational statement. We will not be moved. At the same time, American commanders escalated their communication posture. Radio communications were made directly to the Chinese vessels, formal, professional, and firm, making absolutely clear that the United States was aware of what China was doing, that it was being documented, and that the U.S. considered the behavior to be inconsistent with international maritime law and freedom of navigation principles. Additional American naval assets in the region were brought to heightened readiness. Surveillance aircraft increased their activity in the area. The message being sent through all of these channels simultaneously was layered and deliberate. We see you. We are not afraid of you. We outmatch you in this theater. And this behavior has been noted and recorded. There is also strong reason to believe that in the hours and days following this encounter, American diplomatic channels were activated at a senior-level communications between defense officials in Washington and their counterparts in Beijing, making clear that this kind of gray zone pressure in the Persian Gulf carries consequences for the broader U.S.-China relationship. Military encounters don't exist in isolation. They have diplomatic afterlives. And the United States has been consistent in its approach of following up naval confrontations with direct, senior-level communication to ensure there is no ambiguity about American resolve and American awareness of what China is doing. That is the long game China is playing. And the United States, to its credit, appears to understand this. The response to the Strait of Hormuz encounter, immediate, firm, documented, and diplomatically followed up, reflects an American military and diplomatic establishment that is not willing to let those norm shifts happen without being challenged. Every time the U.S. Navy holds its course, documents the encounter, and communicates directly with Beijing, it is pushing back against the gradual normalization of Chinese military presence in a theater that American strategy depends on. There is a human dimension to all of this that is easy to lose when you are talking about warships and strategic doctrine. These encounters are not happening between abstract geopolitical forces. They are happening between naval officers and sailors, men and women on both sides who are following orders, representing their countries, and operating under real pressure in close proximity to each other. The decisions made by a ship commander in the Strait of Hormuz, how to respond to an unexpected maneuver, how to phrase a radio communication, how to hold a position without creating an unintended situation, those decisions carry strategic weight far beyond the individual. A misunderstanding or miscommunication on either side could turn a tense encounter into something far more consequential. History has shown us many times that significant events can begin not with grand plans, but with small miscalculations. The people managing these encounters in real time carry an enormous responsibility and deserve clear guidance and strong support from their governments. What happened in the Strait of Hormuz is not an isolated event. It is part of a broader pattern. A pattern of Chinese naval activity expanding geographically. A pattern of China testing American resolve in new areas. A pattern of Beijing investing in regional relationships that give its naval presence a strategic rationale beyond simply showing the flag. And it is a pattern that the United States is going to have to manage carefully, consistently, and with both firmness and diplomatic skill, because getting it wrong in either direction carries real consequences for both countries and for global stability. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide, but what happens in those 21 miles has implications that stretch across the entire globe. And the 30-minute response that followed China's challenge in those waters was not just a naval maneuver. It was a statement about American resolve, American awareness, and American determination to remain a stabilizing presence in one of the world's most critical waterways. The question going forward is not whether China will push again. It will. The question is how America responds each time, and whether that response is consistent, credible, and backed by the sustained political will to manage this long-term competition responsibly. Now we want to hear your perspective, because this conversation is bigger than any one video. Do you think China's growing naval presence in the Gulf is a genuine long-term challenge to American strategic interests? Or is it simply an inevitable part of China's rise as a global power that both sides need to learn to manage carefully? Do you think the U.S. Navy's response in the Strait of Hormuz sent the right message? And what do you think needs to happen to keep these kinds of encounters from becoming something more serious down the road? Write it out in the comments below. Be specific, be detailed. This is the kind of conversation this channel exists for. And if this video gave you a clearer, deeper understanding of what is really happening in the Strait of Hormuz, share it. Right now. Send it to someone who follows US, China news, but has never thought about what that rivalry actually looks like when it plays out at sea, in real time, in one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. That one share puts this story in front of someone who needs to hear it. Hit the share button, and we will see you in the next one.